Meta has made the decision and is moving into Lebanon's Leap District. On episode 193 of the Love and Lebanon podcast, Mayor Matt Gentry stops by to recap the process, sharing what this news means for the city. The mayor also answers questions that several of you are asking. What about water? Why a data center and why the incentives? Hear answers to these questions and more right now.
Welcome to the Love and Lebanon podcast, highlighting all the great things happening in Lebanon, Indiana. Have an idea for an episode? Send an email to loveandlebanon@lebanon.in.gov.
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 193 of the Love and Lebanon podcast. I'm Joe LePage, the City of Lebanon Communications and Community Development Director. We are just clear of the Thanksgiving holiday as this podcast airs on the 3rd, and we've got Mayor Matt Gentry here joining us for a post-Thanksgiving edition of this podcast. Mr. Mayor, thanks for joining us.
Always, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Now, before Thanksgiving, a pretty big bombshell dropped. You knew it was coming, and a lot of our city council folks did as well, some folks in the building. Meta announcing they are coming to town as part of the Leap District. Can you kind of recap what that evening was for you to be able to kind of culminate discussions into the announcement that was made?
Yeah, sure. So really this process started close to 2 years ago, actually. That's when I kind of had my first introductory meeting with them, talking through with them of what they were looking to do. Dozens and dozens of technical meetings with staff here on the city side, utility side, working together, understanding what construction timeline looks like, what build time looks like, working through all those details of what they wanted to do because they were kind of in between two different ideas as well. Talking through obviously negotiating the deal was a part of it as well too, but really a long process to essentially get to a point where they announced the potential for a first phase of a data center campus with about an $800 million capital investment. And the really exciting thing for me is that $800 million is huge, but the exciting thing for me is that it's a phase one of a potential 6-phase project, right? So it's really, we're not really just talking about $800 million. We're actually talking about really closer to $4.8 billion as a potential investment here coming in Lebanon in the Leap District.
Is this what you were kind of hoping when the Leap District was first floated to you? Because the first, pun intended, because this was Project Domino, the first domino to fall was a global company, and Eli Lilly, yep. And then you have Meta coming in right after that. Is this what you were kind of hoping for or maybe expecting when this was first floated?
Yeah, I would say that this is what we were, this is ideal scenario, right? Certainly, Eli Lilly's been a phenomenal company. They've been doing amazing work already here in the Leap District in Lebanon, and seeing their investment has been great. And, I think they've announced more than $10 billion of investment out there already. But, Lilly's a kind of a hometown company, right, from Indiana. A lot of people are like, well, we're just doing this just for Lilly. And really, I think having Meta, say, hey, we're likely coming to this community is a huge indicator of what the Leap District is and what it could be. The goal is to attract these, world-class, companies like this and bring them to Lebanon. And so, obviously Lilly's been great, but then I think having that second other user go through all their expansive process, their decision-making of where do they want to locate, make these investments, and then they settle on Lebanon, Indiana, I think is a huge indicator of what's happening here. The great momentum we have in Lebanon and in the Leap District, and, exciting times ahead, I think.
What is it like to try to sell Lebanon to a company like Meta, one that maybe doesn't know or has never been and spent much time in Lebanon?
It was actually interesting because they were very read up on Lebanon, and they talked about how important the downtown was. What we'd done down there. They talked about all of our park investments we've been making. They talked about they actually were asking me about the Big 4 Trail and how important that was. They're like, hey, when's that going to be improved and fully extended?
Homework.
Yeah, okay. They were very well read up on what we were doing here. So I didn't really have to give a huge hard sell of how great Lebanon is and how it's going to be even better in the future. They were kind of already aware of that, which was really kind of exciting. But it certainly indicates why we're doing a lot of these things that we're doing, why quality of life is so important to me, because it helps set that stage. Certainly in today's age, people can work anywhere, right? They can live anywhere. And so a lot of times now people are picking where they want to live first and then finding a job. And so for companies, they've kind of had to kind of reorient how do they approach these things too. And they said, we need to find communities with high qualities of life that we can make these investments in, because we can then help attract employees there too with it. And so you can't just plop a big giant factory in the middle of a place no one wants to live, because you won't be able to find people. So that's kind of why you're seeing a lot of these communities starting investing in quality of place, quality of life, parks, trails, all of those things, because that's becoming now a critical component when it comes to site selection, because you got to have workers to fill these jobs, and people aren't acting like they used to act, where they would just, hey, I got hired by, Procter & Gamble, I'm going to move to Cincinnati. Nowadays it's, I'm going to move to Denver and then find a job, or move to Indianapolis and then find a job. So that's why, this quality of life thing is really important.
And what was the feeling? You remember the feeling when you finally heard that, yes, it's going to happen, and they're coming to Lebanon after all the kind of conversations that kind of went on behind the scenes? This is now front and center.
I'll be honest, once, certainly it was exciting to get to the end of that, and it's exciting for them to say, hey, yeah, we're this is where we're going to go, or we're going to invest it here. But with any good negotiation, though, right, by the time you reach the end, if both parties are a little annoyed with each other, you've had a good negotiation, right? So there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussions, working through all of the agreements, what exactly the incentive package looked like, push and pull, I'll be honest, they didn't necessarily want to make their name public before the meeting, and that was a huge sticking point for me. I'm like, no, we're not gonna, take this through some unknown LLC.
Keep the project dominant.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. We're gonna, if you're going to, we're going to vote on these incentives, we're going to have to know who you are. That's the people of the community to know who you are, of who we're making the decisions on. So, a lot of, certainly it's again, I always appreciate a good negotiation, but I'm a very kind of, once it's done, we're on the next thing, right? So, Meta, they'll start their planning process, move through all that stuff, and that's all great and excited. But, frankly, we're kind of looking, what's next.
And here on episode 193 of the Lebanon podcast, we're talking with Lebanon Mayor Matt Gentry here, recapping the Meta announcement. We'll talk about what's next a little bit later on in the pod. But as you were putting all the words together in the post that you shared on Facebook, you knew it wasn't going to be 100% positive. And so kind of perusing and kind of going through and highlighting some of those things that folks, they jumped out and grabbed hot button topics, if you will, in the past, several months. Number one is always water. So boom, you got hit with that probably right after you hit post on that post for the Meta announcement. Water. Do we have enough water? Is the water situation gonna hinder Meta coming to town? How can this be no new builds without the water? Lebanon's got the shortage, all that stuff, all those hot button things that people have said. Yeah,
so we have now fully executed our agreement with Citizens Energy, and with that agreement in place, they will be delivering us, 2 additional water MGD of water by 2027, additional 8 by 2028. So really, that's the time frame where Meta is looking at where they would actually be operational. So by the time Meta is complete and built, and when they actually need the water will be here for them. And that's something I think we have been trying to explain to people is certainly they're kind of 3 different buckets, right? There's the things that were kind of already in the pipeline that were approved, that had water secured. There were things that were approved but didn't have water. And there's things coming in the future, right? So things that are coming in the future that we know we can plan for and won't need water past the 2027 or past January 1, 2027, we will have water for them, right? So that's kind of where we're working towards that. So we will have the water. We're working towards that. We'll have, frankly, by the time of 2028 happens, we're gonna have almost it'll have taken our system from 4 MGD or about 4.6 MGD to about 14.6, right? So huge, huge increase.
3x, more than
3x, yeah. And then by 2031, right, that's the additional 15 MGD coming. That'll take us to 29 MGD. Sorry, math's hard. 29 MGD, right? So a huge, almost a 10x amount of water we had before. So certainly it's about timing and when these things line up and when they come in together. So as part of that, on that meeting on Monday night, we actually approved a pre-allocation agreement as well for Meta, which essentially says we're essentially kind of reserving as they move through the planning process would help them kind of secure that to go forward. Because, we did learn in this process, we want to avoid a situation where people are going through a planning process, get approved, and at the end of that process, there then is no water, right? Mm-hmm. So we're talking about how we implement that. And frankly, that's something we'll be implementing with other users as well. So certainly as, the Lilly expansions have been talked about and the new investments that Lilly's been talking about, we'll probably follow a similar process. This would go for other larger developments too that would need that kind of larger amount of water we would need to be able to plan for. So, like I said, we're working through all those things, but we have a great team of utilities that's managing all this to work sure that we're protecting their current users. That's the number one goal for all of us all the time, is to make sure that no one ever turns on a faucet and water doesn't come out. That's something we are absolutely trying to make sure that does not happen ever. So that's where we're very careful and very cautious on how we allocate those resources.
And that's been something that you've used this platform and others that when you've been interviewed and things it's not necessarily, the stoppage of the new construction wasn't because, it could be that risk of the faucet not turning on and water not coming out, that type of thing. It was one of those where we want to be really, really conservative when it comes to that and how we're allocating.
Yeah, it's really more of an allocation problem, right, than an actual water supply issue, right? If you looked in our water tank, right, we have more than half of the water, our maximum we could use, just available, right? But the problem is in that tank, Lilly's name is on a bunch of it, right? So the promises we make to a homeowner, the promises we make to a business, essentially says, when you pay for water, when you reserve that water as EDUs in our system, we won't give that to someone else, right? That's kind of the promise we make. So because Lilly paid their availability fees for phase one, they have a big chunk of that water that has their name on it. Now, they may not even use it until 2027, right? But on our end, when we look at it, we assume Lilly could use that tomorrow if they need it, right? And so that's kind of why, again, we balance these things to make sure that everyone's protected and no one doesn't have any promises broken to them.
Gotcha. Everybody, we're talking with Lebanon Mayor Matt Gentry here on episode 193 of the Lebanon podcast, chatting about Meta and other things that are important to you, as you've shown on social media and just random stoppages in Walmarts and Kroger's here locally. Another one of the comments that you received on the post that you shared, and one that we did on the city side as well, incentives, incentivizing certain companies. It happens when usually you're abating real or personal property, that type of thing, number of jobs, all that stuff, capital investments. People thought, why maybe incentivize Meta in this way? What went into that process to incentivize, and if you can recap how you incentivized Meta to come in the LEAP district? Yeah,
sure. So just to talk high level of what the actual package was to Meta. So we did offer a 10-year 50% reduction on their real property, which is the actual buildings themselves. So of the $800 million for Meta, about half of that, about $400 million is real property, about $400 million is personal property, which is all of the computers, servers, all those types of things. And so we offered a 10-year 50% for that. Again, year 11, 100% payment on taxes. And then also on the real property, in these negotiations, it became very apparent to them that their biggest, huge thing for them, that from an attraction standpoint, is the real property is a big sticking point for them, right? Again, if you're making $800 million investment and half of it is just in the equipment, that's a big lift. And so, and because of the way that works too, is every 3 to 4 years, they're totally changing in new equipment, right? So they're making that $400 million investment in the personal property really every 3 to 4 years, right? And so that's where, for them, the real property was the biggest issue. And so how do we work with them to set up that structure? And so the state law, or the state essentially recognized that this is an important thing for data centers. Mm-hmm. They passed a law that allows cities to do a longer term real property tax abatement for data center usage. And so we ended up offering a 35-year, 100% property tax abatement on the personal property. However, in lieu of that, so in lieu of of them paying taxes, we did have them commit to a $1.5 million annual community impact payment. So again, $1.5 million paid every year, right, to the city. And that's also chained to the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which means that if inflation goes up, then $1.5 million goes up, right? Wow. So that's kind of a defined amount by the federal government of how much, we always feel like that number gets, things get more expensive every year, right? That feeling, right? Mm-hmm. So make sure that $1.5 million is the same value in 2024 dollars that it will be in 2034, right? And so that's something that will change with that. And so, for every year that personal property tax payment is in place, that community impact payment will be made, right? So that $1.5 million to start with, but again, that will go up as just CPI goes up. And so that's kind of, frankly, so it's not like they're getting all their taxes waived, because they actually are making that community impact payment as well too. And we can use that for, frankly, anything, parks, trails, streetlights, road paving, whatever we want to use it for. That's something the city can make those improvements with. I think another factor, something to consider here as well too, is that, again, I mentioned this is phase 1 of 6. So for every future phase, right? So if there's 6 phases, they'd make that $1.5 million payment per year per phase as well, right? So if there's 6 phases, it's 1.5 times 6, right? So $9 million. If it's 3 phases, it's times 3, right? So 4.5. So again, that's something I think is going to be, people don't maybe realize how important that piece is. But that was a big important piece for me when it came to just having just the real property. Like, that's not something that's, certainly that's a factor. But the personal property and working through of how we structure that properly and make sure there was a good return for the city was important. You look at a 15-year horizon on this project, we estimate somewhere in the neighborhood of $114 million in tax revenue and community impact payments paid over the next 15 years. So that's not insignificant at all, right? I mean, our entire city budget is close to $24 million or so, right? So $114 million over 15 years is a lot of money for Lebanon. And again, that's just phase 1, right? So if this is 6 phases, 6 times 114, you start getting some pretty big numbers here soon.
Yeah, significant. And math is going to be paramount here, being able to carry, multiply, and all those things and calculate.
Notice I didn't try to do the math on there.
Exactly. We got a thinking paper in front of us. Now, folks are used to hearing, distribution and manufacturing, and you want to have the R&D stuff as well, research and development. Data center, those folks and realizing the importance of attracting a data center like this and that scope, why was it important for Lebanon to do that? Yeah,
I mean, certainly data centers are expanding quickly across the country, right? We're seeing, obviously, as more and more people are engaging with artificial intelligence, with social media, with online, where that data is all housed becomes important, right? And certainly it's got to be protected and safe and secure and make sure no one's hacked and things like that. And so these data centers are really becoming kind of almost a critical piece of infrastructure components for our country. And so certainly as the LEAP district was being talked about and, what are those next generation type of industries to be involved in, certainly data storage and information technology, IT, those are all kind of key components with that, right? So this does, if Meta was on their form, they announced that they would be they estimated about 50 jobs. They told me personally it's probably actually closer to 80 because we just don't want to undersell. They'd rather undersell and over deliver than what it probably actually is. So again, this creates another 80 some jobs that'll be certainly IT jobs, right? You look at the about $36 per hour, right? So these are much higher wages even compared to the Boone County average wage, about 125%, I think, of the Boone County average wage. So these are great jobs for the community. And again, as they add more phases, more people will be hired on, and it kind of scales with that. So certainly, that's a component of it. But really, I look at the biggest win from the city standpoint is just that what that does from a tax revenue standpoint from the impact payments, that just decreases a lot of pressure on current residents from a property tax standpoint, right? And that's frankly the argument for all this economic development is that if you have these large users that are paying these large amounts in taxes just based on their assessed value, it lowers the burden and lowers the pressure on current residents to pay those taxes.
I appreciate that perspective there. And it kind of transitions into one of the other things that we saw in the post that you shared, 50 to 80 jobs. I mean, is that enough? I think you kind of answered your own question, but if you don't mind restating a bit, this is phase 1. And so if there are in fact 6, or you're multiplying obviously the job creation numbers by 6 or one level of X or 2 or 3 or 4.
And I don't think when they add additional phases, I'm not saying they will add 80 more jobs per
Right.
phase, right? There's certainly some efficiencies they get by adding more, but certainly, yeah, as you add more facilities, they do need more staff, need more employees, and so it will go up, right? But I'm not going to say it's going to be 80 jobs per phase. I don't think that's fair to say, but certainly, yeah, it does create jobs. But again, if you look at taking a step back and looking at the way cities are funded by the way the state structures it, so much of our impact is led, or how we fund cities is based on property tax and then income tax, right? And it's income tax of where people live, not necessarily where they work, right? So cities are incentivized from the structure to have very high capital investment in their community, because we know that's a guarantee that they will pay property taxes, that they will put those dollars into the community. Currently in our business park, the numbers fluctuate a little bit, but last time I looked at it, only like 40% of people that work in our business park actually live in Boone County, right? And cities, we can't mandate that they can only hire people from Lebanon or only hire people from Boone County. That's not something we can do. Certainly, we can bring the opportunities to community, and people can, if they want a job there, right, and that opportunity is there for them, right? But we can't mandate companies only hire people from a community. So certainly, looking at it and balancing it, the job numbers aren't as high as what they are in the Lilly site, but the capital investment is very, very high, right? And so that's kind of so frankly, it's a less of a burden on our system too, right? People talk about, hey, we're worried about increased traffic and all this stuff. It's like, is 80 people on 32 going to cause headaches? Not really, right? You know what I mean? So like looking at the impact of the cost versus the infrastructure, this is a really good deal for the city just from that standpoint.
Everybody, you're listening to Mayor Matt Gentry here on the Love and Lebanon podcast, episode 193, talking all things Meta, this latest announcement, and also some of the things dabbling in the future as well. And if you don't mind kind of future casting a bit, Mr. Mayor, looking at it, more potential property, more potential area within the Leap District. Are there other conversations that are happening? We've got Lilly, check, and Meta, check. Okay, are there more parcels that could be added as part of this LEAP project, and what's that future hold for us?
So I can't get into specifics just because all these are kind of still confidential.
Still a project code name and all that stuff.
Names, yes.
Yeah.
Frankly, a lot of times, I don't even necessarily know who the companies are either. But I'll tell you, there are conversations happening. There is significant interest in the LEAP district. Certainly Lilly's initial investment put us on a lot of people's radar. But then now Meta's, I think, we'll do that as well, right? And so this is kind of you've seen this in other communities, certainly, especially the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. A lot of these companies that are, they cluster together, right? And so when they're seeing, maybe a competitor, maybe someone that, another company that's kind of a similar company that they see from either from a size standpoint or from an adjacent industry, but they have similar, management structures, things like that, they'll see, okay, well, why did that company choose to go there, right? And so it kind of makes them think about okay, if they're making that decision, why are they making that decision? Because, again, obviously companies are very competitive, right? And so, you'll see this clustering effect that happens. And so I think I'm optimistic that hopefully we'll have some potential announcements in early 2025. I think for sure we will have announcements in 2025 in the LEAP district of other users. It's just a matter of, when and where those announcements occur. But a lot of ongoing discussions, a lot of interest. Certainly we'll have to see where the new, where Governor-elect Braun will come in on the LEAP district, what his vision is. Certainly the LEAP district kind of started as a vision for, Governor Holcomb and Secretary Chambers. But certainly I think future Governor Braun will have kind of his own opinion and stamp of how he puts it on LEAP, and whoever he picks to be Secretary of Commerce will have thoughts about it. So we'll work through that. But I think we've got things in the pipeline of people saying, what you're putting together here is pretty special. There's some exciting things happening here.
And you talk about that cluster as well. So we may hear from you again in the first quarter of 25 with more.
No promises, but we'll see. No promises, but we'll see. Yeah. Optimistic about it.
But we are also planning, everybody, to have Mayor Gentry along with Citizens Energy on a podcast episode in early 2025, kind of talking about the water situation. As the mayor alluded to, an agreement is in the pipeline, pun intended, to be wrapped up by the end of this year. So beginning of 25, look forward to sharing that good news with you.
Yeah, so we actually, at our Monday council meeting, we started the essentially bond ordinance process to essentially start the bonding with the Indiana Finance Authority, essentially put all the financing in place to start building, right? So we plan to start building Q1 of 2025, and again, to get that water here by 2027, right? So we have to start the work. So, we're in the final stages of that. And so again, I think we'll be pretty soon, it's going to stop being a concept. It's going to start being actual, like you can track the progress as it moves towards reality.
And as we begin to wrap things up here on this episode of the pod, and appreciate your time, what does that mean for once the agreement is signed? I know there are a lot of folks that have wanted to build in Lebanon. There are some areas to the north, south, east, west, all over where they'd like to either start a new home complex or a neighborhood or some kind of commercial addition to our community. When would those things happen once the citizens agreement is signed?
Yeah, so it is signed now. It is signed. Yeah. But once all the financing is in place for the project, that essentially locks it in, because we know once it's financed, once it's been approved, it's happening, right? And so I think once we have that set up, essentially we will be doing a full analysis of what our water demand is, right? To make sure that figuring out, how much is being used, right? What is the, and frankly, is there a way to adjust the amounts we allocate to make sure, again, we talked about this before, right? Mm-hmm. We assume every home uses 500 gallons of water a day. That's not what happens, right? It's closer to 190, right? And so there's a little bit of a gap there, right? So certainly for the people that are kind of in that interim space, wanting to build one home, wanting to build kind of maybe the first phase of a neighborhood, right? We could probably squeeze that numbers out because again, we know even though a watering tank has Lily's name on it, they're really not using it yet, right? So again, we're not going to run out of water. So again, it's figuring out what that number is of what makes sense to help us kind of get through until 2027, just to kind of get to that point where the things that were approved in the process know that they can start to move forward, at least starting their phasing construction wise. And then also, once we know we have this water in place too, projects, that are going to open in 2027, we'll let them start construction in 2026, knowing there's let's say it's a 6-month construction period. They could start in July of 26 to know that by January 1, when they actually need the water will be there too. So again, it's a complicated process, but there's a lot of very talented people on the utility side that are working through that to make sure that, again, we're protecting residents, no one runs out of water, but also make sure that we are essentially maximizing our water supply.
And one of the things that was nice, we had some folks from Citizens Energy that sat in your office and kind of explained some things. Folks that I've seen chime in on social media where, as if to insinuate that Lebanon is the only community that has had to deal with water issues and things along those lines. The number of different municipalities that have collaborated with Citizens Energy
I think it's like 9.
Yeah, it kind of was mind-blowing for me that, okay, so this isn't the first time. We're not creating a wheel of some kind. This is just kind of the replicating of something that's already worked in other communities in the past.
Yeah, this is, and I think it's a big misnomer, certainly in this conversation that's kind of sprung up around water in the state in the last 2 years, right? Moving water around the state is not something new at all, right? And so it may be the first time people are becoming aware of it, or they're actually kind of their antennas are up to hear about it. But that's not, it's very common. In Southern Indiana, they move water a long ways because they have, similar like to Boone County, they have areas that aren't as water blessed, right? And they have heavier water areas that are, right? And so they have a lot of reservoir systems down in Southern Indiana. They have to move water around to serve the community. So certainly it's becoming more and more of a topic, but I do think it's all positive discussions. I think we're working towards a better understanding of how all this works. And it's going to be, we'll see what happens in the next couple of years with this.
And Mr. Mayor, if we can end it this way, we've gone through, I'm counting 4 to 5 different things that were kind of chimed in on, or hot button issues. If David Letterman had a top 10 list, they would be easily the top 5. The different things on the social media post. If people have questions about these things, the 80 jobs, the data center, the water situation, the incentives, they can ask. They can ask our planning office. They can come into your office, make an appointment, or just stop in, that type of thing. I mean, that's certainly easier to go ahead and chime in and what maybe people think, or maybe that they've heard and kind of regurgitate that. But it is more difficult to come in or to call, but they can do that if they want to chat first.
Yeah, always. Yeah. Obviously I am a busy guy, so I try to be available as much as I can, but certainly, phone calls, messages, all that stuff. I do my best to get stay up with everything, but yeah, I do think that's my biggest frustration, is that when people, definitively say something when it's actually not true, right? I'm all for having public discussions and people going back and forth, but I have very low tolerance for when people are spreading things that aren't true, right? So when you come in and say a very definitive statement that's absolutely not true, I will push back on you and call you on that, because as the person that's in the room that knows what's happening, right? It can be very damaging to have, frankly, misinformation being spread, right? And so if people have questions, I'm always happy to answer that. I think the biggest thing is just if you want to question my decisions or question the city council decisions, I'm happy to defend that and explain the thought process through it, right? But I do, frankly, just have very low tolerance for someone making comments that aren't factually true.
Mm-hmm. And Mayor, appreciate your time. And everybody, just so you know, I'll put the mayor's email address and the office line here if you want to call, make an appointment, and be able to have that conversation one-on-one versus 140 characters or so. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you again for your time and the education as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Joe.
All right. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Love and Lebanon podcast. More episodes coming your way soon. Take care.